Glass hit the marble floor before anyone could stop it. Not an accident. Not a clumsy elbow. Thaddeus Vance reached across the check-in counter, looked Raina Obi dead in the eye, and knocked her water glass off the edge himself. Then he turned to the concierge and said, loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear, "Get her out of here. Staff entrance is around the back." Raina did not move. She was 29 years old, wearing a camel wool coat she had bought off a clearance rack 4 years ago and never replaced because she never saw the point. Her natural hair was pulled back, no jewelry except a small pair of gold studs her mother had given her when she graduated law school. She was standing in the lobby of the Vance Grand, the most expensive hotel in the state of Georgia, holding a leather portfolio under her arm. And Thaddeus Vance, 63 years old, fourth-generation hotelier, man whose face appeared on the cover of Southern Business Quarterly 3 times in 5 years, had just told the concierge to remove her, like she was a stray that had wandered in from the parking lot. A concierge, a young man named Patrick, whose hands were visibly shaking, looked between Thaddeus and Raina and did not know what to do with himself. She's. I said what I said. Raina set her portfolio on the counter. Slowly, she looked at the water spreading across the marble floor, and then she looked at Thaddeus Vance, and she said nothing. That was the thing no one in that lobby understood in the moment. They expected her to argue. They expected tears or raised voices or a scene. What they got was stillness. A kind of stillness that comes not from weakness but from a woman who has already won and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. She picked up her portfolio. She walked back toward the entrance. She pushed through the revolving door and stepped out into the Atlanta morning, and she called her assistant, a young woman named Bet Okoro, who had been with her for 2 years, and who knew, when she heard Raina's voice, that something had just shifted. "Move the 11 o'clock, Raina said, "and get me Hartley on the phone." Weeks earlier, the Vance family had been exactly where they always were, on top. Vance Grand had been a Georgia institution since 1961. Thaddeus's grandfather had built the original property on Peachtree, 8 stories of white marble and brass fixtures that became the place where governors shook hands and debutantes had their portraits taken. And every visiting dignitary since Eisenhower had slept in the presidential suite. Thaddeus had expanded it. 2 additional properties in Savannah and Charleston, a resort in Sea Island that had a 12-month waiting list for summer weekends, a hospitality management company that ran 4 boutique hotels in the Southeast under different names. The Vance portfolio was valued, at last public estimate, at somewhere north of $240 million. His wife, Georgette Vance, sat on 6 charity boards and chaired 2. Their son, Philip Vance, had recently been promoted to COO. Their daughter, Brooke, was engaged to a senator's aide and had just been featured in Atlanta Magazine's annual Women to Watch spread. The family had a publicist, a philanthropy director, and a crisis communications firm on retainer, which in retrospect should tell you something. What none of that coverage mentioned, what no reporter had ever been told, because the Vances had structured the deal to prevent exactly that kind of disclosure, was that 18 months ago, when the family had overextended into a new development project in Buckhead, a mixed-use complex they were certain would cement their legacy, a $90 million undertaking that required capital they did not have liquid. They had taken on a private equity partner. Her name was Raina Obi. I was the founder and managing partner of Obi Capital Partners, a private investment firm she had built from nothing starting at 24, seeded with a $200,000 inheritance from her grandmother, and turned over 5 years into a $380 million portfolio. She did not have a publicist. She did not appear on magazine covers. Her firm's website had 11 pages and a contact form, had a reputation in the circles that mattered. Institutional investors, family offices, a small number of high-net-worth individuals who had learned that when Raina Obi called, you listened, and she had no interest in a reputation in circles that didn't. As she had taken a meeting with Philip Vance in February of the previous year at her firm's offices in Buckhead, listened to his pitch for 40 minutes, asked 4 questions, and said she would follow up. Her team spent 6 weeks in due diligence. They found 2 things. The Buckhead project was sound, and the Vance family's liquidity position was considerably worse than their public image suggested. Had gone back to Philip with a counter. She would provide $34 million in preferred equity. Vance family would retain operational control. She would take no public-facing role. The agreement would be confidential. In exchange, her return structure gave her a priority position that would, in the event of any restructuring or sale of the broader Vance portfolio, convert to a controlling stake. Philip had taken that back to his father. Thaddeus Vance had agreed to the terms. He had shaken her hand in a conference room on the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown, and he had thanked her, and he had never, in the 18 months since, once acknowledged what that handshake actually meant. Buckhead project had broken ground. The Vances had attended the ceremony. Philip had given a speech. Thaddeus had cut the ribbon. Their names were on the press release. Raina's name was not. This is what money looks like when it does not want to be seen. And this is what happens when the people who borrowed it forget who is holding the note. Annual Vance Foundation Gala had been held every October for 11 years at the Vance Grand Ballroom. 600 guests, black tie, a live auction, headline speaker, who was always someone whose name you recognized from cable news, and a centerpiece donation to whatever cause Georgette had decided that year deserved the family's public attention. It raised between $800,000 and $1.2 million annually, which the family's publicist made sure appeared in every profile written about them. Raina had not planned to attend. Had been invited, technically. Her firm received an invitation, the way all of the Vance family's business associates received invitations through a mailing that Philip's assistant sent out each August. She had set it aside. She had things to do. What changed was a call she got from Marcus Webb, her legal counsel, 10 days before the gala. He had been reviewing the quarterly reports from the Buckhead project and had found something that required a conversation that should not happen over the phone. They met in person. He walked her through it carefully. When he was finished, Raina sat for a moment, and then she said, "How long?" "Best estimate. They've been moving expenses across accounts for about 4 months. It was not illegal, Marcus said. Not technically. But it was a violation of the operating agreement. And it was exactly the kind of thing that, if Raina chose to exercise the clause it triggered, would allow her to accelerate the conversion of her preferred equity position. He thought about it for 2 days. Then she called Bet and said, RSVP to the Vance Gala, 2 seats. Did not tell Philip. She did not call Thaddeus. She did not have Bet send a note to confirm attendance the way most guests did. She simply planned to be there. Because some conversations are better had in rooms where everyone can hear them. Night of the gala, Raina arrived at 7:42, 18 minutes after the doors opened. She wore a deep green dress, simple cut, nothing dramatic, no date. Just her leather portfolio, which she carried the same way she always carried it, and which a woman near the coat check later described to her friends as the most out-of-place thing in the room. Walked to the check-in table. A woman behind the table, whose name was Candace, whose job it was to manage the guest list and who was 22 years old and doing her absolute best, found Raina's name, confirmed the seat assignment, and reached for a program. That was when Thaddeus Vance walked by. He was coming from the direction of the bar, champagne in hand, shaking hands with a state legislator whose name Raina recognized from the news. He glanced at the check-in table the way wealthy men glance at things in their own spaces, proprietarily, not really looking, just confirming that everything is as it should be. And then his eyes landed on Raina. Watched him process it. The coat she was wearing, the portfolio, the absence of a date, of jewels, of anything that read as belonging. She watched him make a decision about who she was in about 4 seconds. "Can I help you?" he said, not to her, to Candace. Candace, who had just confirmed Raina's name on the list, blinked. "Mr. Vance, she's on the guest list." "Is she with catering?" He said it to Candace still, as if Raina were not standing 3 feet away. "Or one of the setup crew. There's a staff entrance on the side of the building. I've told the event team to make sure they're directing people correctly." "Mr. Vance." Raina's voice was even. "My name is Raina Obi. I believe I'm seated at table 7. Looked at her then, really looked, and she watched the second decision form. Not "oh, I was wrong," but a hardening. A recalculation not of his mistake but of his position. "This is a private event," he said. "I have an invitation. A number of people who receive invitations who are not, ultimately, appropriate for an event of this caliber." He said it with the smile of a man who has spent decades saying terrible things in a pleasant tone of voice. "I'm sure you understand. There are moments in a person's life where the ground shifts, where what was said is so nakedly what it is, not rudeness, not confusion, but a declaration of who he believed she was and who he believed himself to be, that the air in the room changes." Candace had gone completely still. A couple nearby who had been moving toward the ballroom entrance had slowed. A man in a tuxedo near the door was watching. Raina reached into her portfolio. She removed a single document. She set it on the check-in table. "I'll find my own seat," she said. "But I'd recommend you read that before the evening is over." She walked into the ballroom. She sat at table 7. She ate the first course. She talked to the woman next to her, a cardiologist from Emory named Dr. Annette Shaw, who was warm and funny and had strong opinions about the bread, and Raina liked her immediately. She listened to the opening remarks from Philip, who did not see her in the room, or if he did, gave no sign of it. Watched Thaddeus work the room with the ease of a man who had never once in his life questioned his welcome anywhere. She waited. Midway through the main course, she excused herself and walked to the far end of the ballroom where the event's communications coordinator, a young man she had spoken to briefly on her way in, was standing with a tablet. She spoke to him for about 90 seconds. He looked at her, then at the document she showed him on her phone, and then he nodded. She went back to her seat. 9:15. As dessert was being cleared, the evening's MC, a morning news anchor from Channel 11 named Daphne Ruiz, returned to the podium for the live auction portion of the evening. She went through the first 3 items without incident. A wine weekend in Napa, a piece of art from a local gallery, a golf package at a course in Sea Island. And she paused. "Or we go to item 4, Daphne said, and something in her tone shifted. Because she was a professional, and she had just been handed a note, and she was doing exactly what communications professionals do when something unexpected arrives, which is to keep moving and let the information land on its own. "I've been asked to share an update regarding the Vance Foundation and the Buckhead Commons Development Project that the foundation has been supporting this year." In the room, people were only half listening. That's how these events work. But certain names cut through a room. A statement from OB Capital Partners confirms that effective this evening, the firm has exercised a contractual provision in its operating agreement with the Vance Grand Holdings Group, triggering a review process that will transfer majority oversight of the Buckhead Commons project to OB Capital's Management Committee. Room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in waves. The tables nearest the podium first, then spreading outward as people leaned toward each other. As phones appeared, as Philip Vance, at the family table near the front, turned around slowly like a man trying to identify an earthquake's origin point. Thaddeus Vance stood up, looked across the room. Lena was still seated at table 7. She had not stood. She had not gestured. She had not raised her voice or gone to a microphone. She was sitting with her water glass in her hand, and when Thaddeus found her eyes across the ballroom, she simply held his gaze. There was nothing theatrical about it. That is what the woman who later described the scene to her book club kept coming back to. That there was no drama in Raina's expression, just clarity. The look of someone who has read every line of a contract and is now watching someone else finally read it too. Thaddeus Vance walked toward her table. Got halfway across the room before his son caught his arm. Philip said something to him, quietly, close. Thaddeus's face went through several things in quick succession. What came out the other side was a man who suddenly looked considerably older than he had 40 minutes ago. As stopped, he did not reach the table. Raina left at 9:48. She did not make a speech. She did not give a statement to the 2 reporters who were suddenly aware she existed and were trying to reach her as she walked through the lobby. She shook Dr. Shaw's hand on the way out and said she hoped the bread situation improved at next year's event, and Dr. Shaw laughed. And that was the last thing Raina said inside the Vance Grand. In the parking lot, her car was waiting. She got in. She set the portfolio on the seat beside her. Ed called at 10:04. It's already on Twitter. And which part? All of it. Someone at table 3 had been live streaming the auction and caught the announcement. There's video of Thaddeus standing up. It's at 40,000 views. Raina watched the city pass outside the window. The lights of Atlanta at night, a thing she had loved since the first time she drove into it. From the airport 9 years ago, 20 years old, and arriving with 2 suitcases and a scholarship and a grandmother's voice in her head saying, "You belong everywhere you decide to walk into." "And the statement from Hartley?" she asked. "Those out at midnight. They're ready." "Good, good." Ask Bet to hold her calls until morning, and she watched the rest of the drive in quiet. What followed in the next 72 hours was not quiet. The story moved the way stories move in the digital age. First Twitter, then the business press, then, by Sunday morning, a segment on 2 national cable networks. The angle that took hold was not the legal one, which was genuinely complicated, and which Marcus was handling with the composed efficiency of a man who had been waiting to handle it, but the human one. A black woman in her 20s had built a private equity firm. That firm had stepped in to rescue a storied Georgia hospitality institution when the that ran it couldn't find the capital, and the patriarch of that family at his own charity, Gala, in front of 600 people, had tried to have her removed from the building through the service entrance. Raina did not give interviews. Her publicist, she had one. She simply did not use her much, declined every request. OB Capital's statement, when it came, was 4 sentences long and contained no adjectives. Vance family's statement was 6 paragraphs and contained many adjectives, none of which were useful. By Tuesday, 2 of the family's minority hotel partners had put calls in to their attorneys. By Wednesday, the Buckhead Commons contractors had formally acknowledged OB Capital's oversight authority on the project. By the following Monday, Southern Business Quarterly, the magazine that had put Thaddeus Vance on its cover 3 times in 5 years, had published a 3,000-word piece titled "The Invisible Partner: How OB Capital Quietly Became the Vance Family's Lifeline." And the reporter had reached out to Raina for comment. She had sent back 2 sentences. "The terms of our operating agreement were honored. We look forward to the project's completion." And she went back to the Vance Grand exactly once after that night. Months later, on a Tuesday in January, she arrived at the lobby for a meeting with the management committee that was now, in practical terms, accountable to her. She wore the same camel wool coat. She carried the same portfolio. She arrived at 9 line, 3 minutes before her scheduled start time, and the concierge, a different young man now, not Patrick. Oh, she hoped Patrick had landed somewhere good, was at his post, and greeted her by name and offered to take her coat. As she declined the coat, she thanked him. She walked through the same lobby where 5 months earlier, Thaddeus Vance had knocked a water glass off a counter and told her to find the service entrance. The same chandelier overhead. The same marble floors, the same brass fixtures that had been there since 1961, put in by a man who had built something real and passed it to a son, who had passed it to a grandson, who had eventually needed someone else to hold it up. Meeting took 2 hours. She asked questions. She listened to answers. She identified 2 operational inefficiencies that her team would address in the next quarter. She shook hands at the end and walked back through the lobby and pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the January cold. Her phone buzzed. A text from Bet. Philip Vance requested a call. No subject given. Typed back, Wednesday, 30 minutes. My office. She put her phone in her coat pocket and walked to her car and drove back to Buckhead through the morning traffic, past the construction site where the Buckhead Commons development was now 40% complete. Her name nowhere on the sign out front, her signature on every document that mattered. There is a particular kind of dignity that does not require a room to witness it. It does not need an audience or a moment of public vindication. It is the dignity of a person who knows exactly what they have built and does not need anyone else to announce it. Thaddeus Vance had spent 63 years learning how to command rooms. Ina Obi had spent 5 years building the kind of position where rooms command themselves in her favor, whether she is in them or not. The glass he knocked off that counter in October was replaced the same evening. The marble floors were cleaned. By the time the gala ended, there was no trace of anything having happened. Except there was. On the desk in Raina's office in Buckhead, in a small glass dish where she kept a few things she did not want to forget, a cufflink that had belonged to her father, a folded napkin from her law school graduation dinner, a photograph of her grandmother. There was a single pearl. One of the staff at the Vance Grand had found it after the gala, rolling near the baseboards, separated from whatever it had belonged to. They had not known what to do with it. They had set it at the check-in desk. Somehow, eventually, it had made its way to Raina. Not know exactly how. She had not asked. He kept it anyway, not as a trophy, not as a reminder of what happened that night, but as a small, hard thing that had come loose from something that broke and survived and ended up somewhere it was valued. Some things have a way of finding where they belong. I keep thinking about that water glass. Not the gala, not the announcement, not the moment Thaddeus Vance stood up in a room full of 600 people and realized what had just happened. I keep thinking about that small, deliberate thing he did at the check-in counter, reaching over, looking her in the eye, and knocking it off the edge. Like she wasn't worth the effort of a complete sentence. Like the fastest way to make her disappear was to treat her as though she already had. I didn't understand Dite. What people like him almost never understand is that Raina had already done the hardest work long before she walked through those doors. She had spent 5 years building something real, making decisions that were right when they were also difficult, honoring agreements when no one was watching, doing the unglamorous, grinding, careful work of earning a position that couldn't be taken from her. That's what integrity actually looks like in practice. Not grand gestures, not speeches, just doing the right thing repeatedly when it costs something until the thing you've built is sturdy enough to hold. And then there's the way she thought. The way she saw the situation clearly when most people would have been too angry to think straight. She didn't react the night of the lobby incident. Called her assistant, and she said, "Move the 11 o'clock," and she got to work. She read the operating agreement. She found the clause. She understood exactly what it meant and exactly when to use it. Intelligence isn't just about knowing things. It's about knowing what to do with what you know. And when. Raina had both. She had built a $380 million portfolio, not because she was lucky or connected, but because she was relentlessly clear-eyed about what was real and what was noise. But what I come back to most is the persistence. She had been building quietly for 5 years before this moment. She had taken a meeting, run 6 weeks of due diligence, structured a deal, and then stepped back into the shadows while another family put their name on everything she was holding up. That requires a specific kind of strength that doesn't get talked about enough. The ability to keep going when you're not being seen, to stay committed to the work when no one is acknowledging it, to trust that what you're building is real even when the world is handing someone else the credit. Raina didn't need the Vances to know who she was. She knew who she was, and she was willing to wait until the moment it mattered. There's a cause and effect logic to this story that has nothing to do with luck or coincidence. Thaddeus Vance spent decades treating his position as permanent and his judgment of people as infallible. Those two beliefs led him, directly and predictably, to that lobby. And Raina spent years doing the opposite, staying honest about risk, staying humble about what she didn't know, staying persistent when the path was long. Those habits led her just as directly to Table 7. A pearl ended up where it was valued. That's not magic. That's just what happens, eventually, when you build the kind of person who deserves to keep it.